just an absolutely beautiful day here in Middle Tennessee. I got off Facebook, y'all, but I'm going to share with you intimately between me and you because you're my friends and family. Peace and love. I tell you what, our government is either corrupt, inept, or both. And it's both. The bottom line is you're $23 trillion in debt to a central bank. The federal government is nothing more than a front for a central bank at this point. But keep your powder dry. I don't know what's going to happen with the Epstein murder, suicide, whatever you want to call it. I call flag on the play. But I've called flag on the play quite some time. Our government's run by a bunch of crooks. And they do it because they got an open credit card called the Federal Reserve. It's as simple as that. We can either take the republic back or it'll fold bankruptcy into world government, world currency, whatnot. So it's our job as Americans to figure out what we want to do. Currency and ones and zeros running through the system. And you got people like Epstein, possibly Bloomberg, sitting offshore on islands doing market manipulation and whatnot. These people start wars, fund both sides of wars. I mean, General Grant, he ordered, he knew during the war, in the Civil War. And Judah P. Benjamin, he went back to where? England. And he was Secretary of State of the Confederacy. I'm a student of life, culture, Western civilization, religion, politics, law, philosophy, banking, science. And I'm continually fascinated with Western civilization being a Judeo-Christian concept, I guess, because the early Roman Republic obviously was not Christian. There probably were some Hellenistic Jews in the Greek. Of course, throughout Europe and America, you have pagans. We all know what pagans are. Heathens, I guess, so to speak. You know, you can go to any trailer park or any ghetto and find them. And my friend Gilon from Israel, who lives in London now, writes a lot about is what is a Jew, what is a Christian, what is a Muslim. And it's fascinating. I had this conversation the other night with an Episcopalian from Virginia who was a General Lee supporter and an apologist, an advocate for the Confederacy, which constitutionally they were probably in the right. But either way, we started talking about this fascination with Israel. And, you know, this blank look comes over his face. He said that he worshipped a Jew when Jesus was a Jew, and that this Jew, Jesus, created the universe, blah, 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 blah. So like my friend Gilon says, what is a Jewish state? How does it define itself? And what's even more fascinating, after the Protestant and Catholic wars of Western civilization and how we as Americans arrived at separation of church and state, it's like that suddenly cuts off when we're all talking about Israel. But if the Catholics started bulldozing homes here in America, fuck, there'd be fucking shit thrown everywhere. And same goes for Jews and Christians or whatever, Protestants. But the minute the Israelis or the Jews or whoever start bulldozing homes, people's homes in Palestine, and putting... Either way, I was in New Orleans and had returned to the church, having a young son. I wanted to bring him up with some type of moral code. And this is when the Episcopals were ordaining the gay priest, openly gay priest. I was like, nah, from what I understand, that's probably not the way to go. But anyway, I started researching the Catholic Church, being there in New Orleans and being heavily French and Catholic. And started looking into those things about what makes a Catholic, how did the Catholic Church evolve, how did Judaism and Christianity, the Roman Empire, the Greeks, the Orthodox, it's all quite fascinating to me. But it was right after 9/11 that we went to a New Year's Eve party, and I met this gorgeous, gorgeous girl. One of the prettiest girls I've ever seen in my life. And we were just making small talk, and I asked her where she was from, and she started to cry. She was from Palestine, and her family had been kicked off their land. And it touched me. And I really started to research, I guess, what we call Zionism. It's all quite fascinating, but what is fascinating is that America prides itself on having separation of church and state. And yet when it comes to Israel and the Palestinians and the Christians and the Muslims that live there and then in Gaza Strip, these things don't apply. And that's hard for me as an American to decipher and accept, especially when we support Israel the way that we do, being Americans. It's fascinating. But they do control the banks. Jews historically have charged interest, and that's how they get their power. Fascinating. Peace.